Moon Knight. Marvel's Moon Knight concluded after 6 episodes this past Wednesday, and it follows a man with a split personality as he's granted the powers of an Egyptian god and must stop a malevolent prophet from unleashing an even more malevolent god on the world. And not gonna lie, this, in my opinion, is the best Marvel Cinematic Universe series to date. For me, it was Hawkeye until this series came along. I thought this show was terrific. I felt like it went into directions and emotional depths that most Marvel movies or really TV shows like wouldn't go to. And I thought it just did everything so well.
Yeah, I personally, overall, I think I loved Moon Knight. This was, again, a show I was very ecstatic for from the MCU. Mm-hmm. Every other show for me was kind of, it's like I liked it, good, love, but there hasn't been a show where I felt like I truly loved it, and Moon Knight is the one I truly loved it. Mm-hmm. I loved how we got to see really how Mark Spector and Stephen Grant, they constantly butt heads throughout the show. I loved seeing how the Egyptian gods were honestly represented. I think that was just beautifully well done, because we don't really see a lot of Egyptian gods representation, unfortunately. It's always been Norse or Greek, which is great. Those are great mythologies. I'm not, hating on them. I love those mythologies, but Egyptian has always been one of my favorites personally. Mm-hmm. And so seeing how they really took to the text of how some of these gods looked and everything, such as Tawatet and, so many of these gods, or at least 3 of them, the 3 big ones, and how they looked very animalistic and everything. I absolutely loved it. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, I loved the mental battle that Stephen Grant and Mark Spector had throughout the show.
Yep.
I love the psychological nature of how they were butting heads. They couldn't see eye to eye. There's always some sort of hatred and pity and etc. But then when you get to a certain episode, and I think to me this episode 5 was like my favorite episode across all of the MCU shows, if not probably some Marvel television shows, because it was so amazing, and I think they utilize Egyptian even mythology to its core and root and nature of how Mark Spector should deal with his other personality, Stephen Grant, and how Stephen Grant should deal with Mark Spector, and seeing how all of this transfolded, and seeing really how, and unfortunately, and this is something I get from the God of War and even other mythology, sometimes the gods are not always pure of heart. They're not good. Mm-hmm. And Khonshu has taken this. To me, this was more like Moon Knight. That Mark Spector became Moon Knight because of a bit of who Khonshu was and how he really manipulated and took this broken man and turned him into something and tried to almost solidify his being a ruthless mercenary and killer, and be like, this is why you're special. This is what, like, forget everything else. And, Khonshu is just, oh man, I absolutely love what they did with Khonshu. I love what they did with, again, to me, this show was just amazing. And I liked one of the messages of really, when it comes to personality disorders and mental illness, is that it shouldn't be something you fear. It is a part of you. It is not a curse, and you should accept that. It's unfortunate, but it is a part of you. It what makes you you, and what makes you special in that moment. And again, this show just knocked it out of the water from episode 1 all the way to episode 5. Finale was a bit underwhelming. I've been noticing finales of these MCU shows have been underwhelming, but overall, I think Moon Knight as a series, what it was doing, a psychological character study of Mark Spector, not just him, again, he has different personalities, was just so well done that I'm just floored by the show.
Yeah, and again, taking off of what you said as far as mental illness and everything like that, the show shows, a lot of that has to do with coming to terms with, abuse and grief and everything like that. It's symbolic of the things that we do to cope and what happens when we don't learn how to cope with certain things that have happened to us. The twists and how Mark and Steven come to terms with certain things are both unpredictable, they're poignant, and they're satisfying. And again, this goes back to what I said before as far as this show going into certain emotional and mental territories that most MCU entries don't. And I really appreciated that in this show. I thought it did it all very, very well. And as far as the finale, honestly, I did like the finale. I liked the finale. It was satisfying. And even the post-credit scene after the final episode. I'm like,
yes.
I'm like, oh shit, because like there was one question that I had with certain blackouts that the character has, and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense now. And even then too, they're like how certain parts with the characters of Mark Spector and Stephen Grant end off. I'm like, oh, like what's gonna happen with Moon Knight now? So it's the only thing that we're gonna see, and I'm like, oh, never mind. This post-credit scene says otherwise. We're not done with him yet, and I want to see the role that Moon Knight plays in future MCU entries. So
yeah,
I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, like I remember when I was going up to the season finale, and I was a bit late because I watched 4, 5, and 6 all in one night. It was a good piece of night.
I watched 5 and 6 this morning.
So I remember after 6 came out, I heard there was a post-credit scene, and it got me wondering. I was like, I have a feeling I know what it is, and as I'm watching it, I'm like, yep, I was right. My speculation was right. And this has me excited. Mm-hmm. But yeah, overall, I think Moon Knight, absolutely loved it, absolutely floored. I like the costume design change, especially considering from the comics. I like how it's more of an Egyptian garb, mummified look. Again, I think how the Egyptian gods are represented, I think for what they were able to do in season 1, I liked. I wish they did a bit more, but again, I think the biggest one of what they were actually able to do was really episode 5. That threw me for a loop. I was like, wow, this is that? Oh my god, I love how it's being done. And overall, this show is just a solid show. It's one of the best MCU shows I think Marvel has put out, and I think Marvel should really take a look at why this was so good in a sense of how it also wasn't connected, or it didn't rely too much on the connective tissue to the greater MCU, which I think benefited this show greatly as well, compared to, Hawkeye, all the other shows, really. So
yeah, this felt more of its own element than most things that we've seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But at the same time, again, considering that it's a Marvel Cinematic Universe, we know that it's gonna be involved in some other way later down the line. Mm-hmm. But I like how they took the time and effort to develop this enough so that way it feels so much more like its own thing, that it's an even better piece of the puzzle in later entries when it does eventually interact with other characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and other IPOs, as you usually put it. So again, all in all, terrific show. Again, among the best, if not the best, Marvel Cinematic Universe series that are out there at the moment. For everybody, if you haven't gotten a chance to watch this or at least finish this show, highly recommend that you do, especially if you're an MCU fan. You will love this. So for everyone who did get a chance to actually watch this series, leave your thoughts wherever it is that you can.